She called herself the future Mrs. Hale while his real wife was sitting 10 feet away. The words floated through the ballroom like a glass dropped on marble, beautiful for 1 second, then impossible to ignore. Vanessa Cross stood beneath the golden Hale Empire logo, her champagne flute raised high, her silver gown catching the chandelier light as if the entire night had been designed to crown her. Around her, 500 guests in black tie turned slowly toward the woman seated at table 1. Evelyn Hale did not move. She did not blink too quickly, did not reach for her phone, did not give the cameras the kind of pain they were starving to capture. She simply rested one hand beside her untouched dinner plate and let the room reveal itself. Richard Hale stood next to Vanessa with the calm expression of a man who had mistaken silence for permission. His hand remained at Vanessa's waist. He did not correct her. He did not laugh it off. He did not say, "My wife is right there." That absence said more than any confession could have. A thin ripple of whispers moved across the Waldorf Astoria ballroom, sliding between crystal glasses, white roses, and gold-rimmed place cards that had cost more than some people's rent. Tonight was supposed to celebrate 40 years of Hale Empire, a company built on old money, steel contracts, hotel towers, and the kind of family name people in New York lowered their voices to pronounce. But Vanessa had turned the anniversary gala into a private coronation. She smiled toward Evelyn with practiced sweetness, the kind that looked harmless until it reached the eyes. "To new beginnings," Vanessa said, and several guests clapped because powerful rooms often applaud before they understand what they are applauding. Evelyn looked up at the screen behind the stage, where the Hale crest glowed in warm gold. For 12 years, she had stood beside that name without asking anyone to praise her for it. She had sat through board dinners, charity auctions, winter fundraisers, and midnight strategy calls, always quiet enough for people to call her graceful and dismiss her in the same breath. The quiet Mrs. Hale, the decorative wife, the woman in the photos beside Richard, never the headline. Then the host stepped forward, trying to soften the strange silence with a laugh. "And of course," he said, reading from the teleprompter, "tonight's celebration was personally approved by Mrs. Hale herself." Vanessa's smile widened, as if the title had already landed in her hands. But at table 1, an older board member stopped clapping. Another lowered his glass. Evelyn slowly picked up her black clutch from the chair beside her. Richard finally glanced down from the stage, and for the first time that evening, confidence flickered across his face like a candle meeting wind. Evelyn opened the clasp. Inside, beneath a folded linen handkerchief, rested a silver USB drive, a sealed board resolution, and the one truth nobody had invited Vanessa to learn. Mrs. Hale was not a title waiting to be taken. It was the name on every document that mattered. The applause that followed Vanessa's toast did not sound like approval to Evelyn. It sounded like calculation. In rooms like this, people did not clap because they believed in something. They clapped because they were waiting to see which side of the room would still have power by morning. Evelyn had learned that lesson years ago, long before the chandeliers, before the reporters, before Richard Hale began smiling at other women as if loyalty were an old code he had outgrown. Back then, Hale Empire was not a golden logo on a ballroom screen. It was a failing company with late invoices, nervous lenders, and 8,000 employees wondering whether their paychecks would clear by Friday. Richard had worn confidence like a tailored suit, but Evelyn had seen the numbers. She had sat at their kitchen island at 2 in the morning, barefoot on cold marble, reading debt reports while the rest of the house slept. She had called bankers in Chicago before sunrise, studied hotel leases in Dallas, renegotiated steel contracts in Pennsylvania, and signed documents with a hand steady enough that no one knew she was scared. Richard gave speeches. Evelyn kept the lights on. He stood in front of cameras. She sat behind frosted glass, changing the terms that saved the company from being carved into pieces. At first, Richard thanked her. Quietly, privately, almost tenderly. He would kiss her forehead in the hallway and say he did not know what he would do without her. But gratitude has a way of fading in men who start believing applause belongs only to them. The more Hale Empire recovered, the less Richard mentioned her name. At board dinners, he introduced Evelyn as his beautiful wife, never as the woman who had found the emergency financing. At charity events, he let donors praise his vision while Evelyn stood beside him with a polite smile and a glass of sparkling water. Newspaper profiles called him the heir who rebuilt an empire. Evelyn clipped one article, folded it once, and placed it in a drawer she never opened again. She was not angry then. Not fully. She told herself marriage was not a stage, and love did not need witnesses. So she kept working. She approved budgets, reviewed acquisitions, protected the Hale name from Richard's expensive instincts, and carried herself with the kind of calm people mistook for emptiness. Then Vanessa arrived, first as a public relations consultant with bright ideas and louder perfume, then as a constant presence in Richard's calendar. Evelyn noticed the extra chair in meetings, the late messages, the way Richard began correcting Evelyn in public over things he had learned from her in private. Still, she did not compete. She had no interest in chasing a man who needed an audience to remember his vows. Across the ballroom, Vanessa laughed too loudly at something Richard whispered. Evelyn's phone lit up beneath the tablecloth. A message from Thomas Reed appeared on the screen. He is about to give her your name. Evelyn read it once. Then she turned the phone face down, lifted her eyes to the glowing Hale crest, and finally understood that silence was no longer mercy. It was evidence. Vanessa did not return to her seat after the toast. She moved through the ballroom as if she had been waiting her whole life to be watched. Every few steps, she paused beside a donor, a board member, a senator's wife, or one of Richard's old college friends, offering her hand with a smile polished enough to reflect the chandeliers. Above, "I will be taking a more visible role in the family soon," she said, her voice bright, careful, and just loud enough to reach the people behind her. No one asked what role. No one asked who had approved it. That was the strange cruelty of wealthy rooms. A woman could stand beside the truth for 12 years and be treated like furniture, while another woman could borrow a last name for 12 minutes and be welcomed like destiny. Evelyn watched from table 1, her silver USB still hidden inside her clutch. She saw Vanessa accept congratulations she had not earned. She saw Richard allow it. That was the part that settled coldest in her chest. Not Vanessa's performance, but Richard's quiet permission. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne, and Vanessa lifted a glass without looking at him. "Thank you," she said, then laughed when he answered. "Of course, Mrs. Hale." She did not correct him. Instead, her eyes moved across the room until they found Evelyn. The smile that followed was small, private, and meant to wound without leaving a mark. Evelyn folded her hands in her lap. The diamond on her wedding ring caught the light once, then disappeared beneath her fingers. Across the table, an older board member named Martin Ellis stared down at his untouched salad as if he had suddenly lost his appetite. He had been there the night Evelyn saved the Chicago expansion. He knew. Some of them knew. But knowing and speaking were two different currencies, and most people in that room had spent years choosing the cheaper one. Richard finally stepped away from Vanessa and crossed the ballroom toward Evelyn. The crowd parted for him with automatic respect. He bent down beside her chair, his smile still arranged for anyone watching. "Do not make a scene," he said softly. Evelyn turned her face toward him. Up close, she could see the faint strain beneath his confidence, the tightness near his jaw, the slight impatience of a man who believed consequences were for other people. "This is an important night," he added. "For the company." Evelyn looked toward the stage, where the Hale Empire logo glowed above Vanessa's silver dress. "I know," she said. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Then do not embarrass me tonight." For one quiet second, the ballroom seemed to fall away. Evelyn remembered the first time he had said her name like it mattered. She remembered believing him. Then she remembered every year after that, every erased signature, every borrowed idea, every smile he gave the world while she carried the weight behind it. She did not raise her voice. She did not ask him how long it had been. She did not mention Vanessa. She simply reached into her clutch and touched the cool edge of the USB drive. "I was not planning to," she said. Richard searched her face, waiting for tears, anger, pleading, anything familiar enough to control. He found none of it. Behind him, Vanessa lifted her glass again, already practicing the posture of a queen. Evelyn closed her clutch with a soft click, so small no one else heard it, and so final that Richard took one step back. Richard stepped back as if the sound of Evelyn's clutch had unsettled something he could not name. For years, he had believed her silence was a room he owned, a place where he could leave his mistakes and find them untouched in the morning. But Evelyn's silence had never been empty. It had been filled with signatures, contracts, late-night calls, and promises made to a dying man who had understood the Hale name better than his own son ever would. Long before this ballroom, before Vanessa's silver gown and Richard's polished betrayal, there had been a hospital suite on the Upper East Side where William Hale lay beneath white sheets, his hand thin but steady around Evelyn's. Outside the window, winter pressed against the glass, turning New York into a blur of gray rooftops and quiet streets. William had built Hale Empire from a regional construction firm into a national dynasty, but in his final months, he stopped talking about buildings and balance sheets. He talked about character. Richard loves the shine, he told Evelyn one evening, his voice rough but clear. You understand the structure. She had tried to stop him, uncomfortable with the weight of those words, but William only shook his head. On the small table beside his bed was a leather folder, dark brown, worn at the corners. From years of board meetings. Thomas Reed stood near the door, younger then, silent, holding a pen. William opened the folder and showed Evelyn the clause that would change everything. If Richard endangered Hale Empire through public scandal, reckless transfer of assets, reputational harm, or any attempt to hand influence to someone with no legal authority, controlling voting power would pass to Evelyn. Not temporarily, not symbolically, fully. I am not giving you my company, William said. I am trusting you with the people inside it. Evelyn remembered looking down at the pages until the words blurred. She had not wanted power. She had wanted her marriage to survive without needing it. William must have seen that, because his expression softened. Then keep it folded away, he said. A lock is not a weapon unless someone tries to break the door. For years, she kept that folder inside a safe behind the bookshelves in her study. She never mentioned it during arguments. She never used it when Richard dismissed her in meetings. She never reached for it when newspapers praised him for decisions she had made. Hope can make a woman patient far longer than pride ever would. But hope had limits. Evelyn had learned that limits did not arrive with thunder. Sometimes they arrived in a ballroom, under chandeliers, while another woman accepted a name that had been protected by someone else's hands. Back at the gala, Richard returned to Vanessa's side, forcing a smile as the band began another soft arrangement. Evelyn looked toward the stage and saw the mistake he had just made with perfect clarity. By allowing Vanessa to claim a future role in Hale publicly, by letting donors, reporters, and board members hear it without correction, Richard had done more than humiliate his wife. He had triggered the very clause William created to protect the empire from him. Her phone lit again. Thomas Reed. I am in the West Corridor with the folder. Evelyn did not hurry. She rose from her chair with the kind of calm that made Martin Ellis lower his head, not in pity, but in recognition. The woman everyone had mistaken for decoration was about to become the signature they could no longer ignore. Evelyn left table 1 without drawing attention, though every serious person in the ballroom seemed to feel the shift before they saw it. Her heels crossed the marble floor with measured quiet, passing beneath garlands of white roses and gold ribbon, past servers carrying untouched entrees and donors pretending not to watch. Behind her, Vanessa's laughter rose again near the stage, bright and thin, while Richard leaned close to a television producer as if he could still direct the story from the center of the room. Evelyn did not look back. The West Corridor was cooler than the ballroom, lined with dark wood panels and framed photographs of Hale towers from Chicago to Atlanta. In each photograph, ribbon cuttings showed Richard smiling in front of buildings he had nearly lost. Evelyn paused at one image, a hotel opening in Boston, where she stood half a step behind him in a cream coat, her hands folded, her name missing from the bronze plaque below. She remembered that winter. She remembered negotiating the contractor settlement from a hospital waiting room while Richard practiced his speech in the mirror. Then she kept walking. Thomas Reed stood near the service elevator with William Hale's old leather folder tucked beneath his arm. He looked older than he had in the hospital suite, silver now at his temples, but his posture carried the same careful restraint. He had spent 3 decades protecting the Hale family from outsiders. Tonight, he had come to protect it from its heir. You saw it? Evelyn asked. Thomas nodded once. The board heard it. The donors heard it. The press heard it. He allowed an unauthorized person to represent future influence over Hale Empire at an official corporate event. Evelyn looked through the open ballroom doors. Vanessa was posing for a photograph with Richard, her left hand placed delicately against his sleeve, her face turned toward the cameras as though history had already accepted her. "Is there still another way?" Evelyn asked. Thomas followed her gaze. His answer took a moment, not because he was unsure, but because he understood what the question cost her. "Not after tonight." Evelyn lowered her eyes to the folder. For 12 years, she had carried power like a sealed letter, refusing to open it because opening it meant admitting the marriage it was meant to protect had already failed. Thomas handed her the documents. Inside were William's final directive, the morality and governance clause, the emergency voting transfer, and the board resolution removing Richard as chief executive officer if the clause was activated. The papers were not dramatic. No perfume, no jewels, no raised voice. Just black ink, dated signatures, notarized pages, and the quiet authority of a man who had known exactly where his empire would break. "The directors are ready," Thomas said. "Martin Ellis has already signaled support. So has Linda Carver. Once you authorize release to the screen system, the vote becomes record." Evelyn touched the corner of the page where William Hale had signed his name. She did not feel triumph. Not yet. What she felt was the old ache of a woman who had given a man years to become better than his weakness, only to watch him mistake patience for surrender. From inside the ballroom, the band shifted into a softer love song. The sound drifted into the corridor, elegant and cruel. Thomas opened a second envelope and removed the resolution. "You do not have to do this publicly," he said. Evelyn looked at the glowing ballroom beyond him, where Vanessa was wearing a borrowed future and Richard was letting her. "He made it public first," she said. Then she took the pen. Evelyn signed only her initials in the west corridor, not because the papers required more, but because everything else had been signed years ago by a man Richard had stopped listening to the moment inheritance became louder than instruction. Thomas Reed took the resolution back with both hands, careful as if he were carrying a piece of glass. "The screen system is ready," he said. "The board line is open. Once you give the signal, there is no private version of this night anymore." Evelyn looked through the ballroom doors. Vanessa had persuaded the band to play something slower, something romantic enough to make the room uncomfortable. She stood near the stage with Richard beside her, glowing under the warm light, lifting her glass again as though one toast had not been enough. Around them, cameras adjusted, phones rose, and guests leaned closer to one another with the restless hunger of people who sensed a scandal but did not yet know where to look. Evelyn turned her wedding ring once around her finger. It had been chosen on a rainy afternoon in Boston, years before Hale Empire became a name that opened doors from Manhattan to Los Angeles. Richard had been younger then, less polished, almost humble. He had slipped the ring onto her hand in a small restaurant with red leather booths and terrible parking, promising he would never let the company become more important than the family they were building. She had believed him because belief had been easier than doubt, and because love, at the beginning, often feels like evidence. Now the ring felt neither precious nor painful. It felt complete, like a sentence that had finally reached its period. Evelyn removed it slowly. No trembling, no performance, no need for witnesses. The diamond rested in her palm, bright under the corridor light, a small cold star from a life she no longer needed to defend. Thomas lowered his eyes out of respect. "Do you want me to keep that?" he asked. Evelyn placed the ring on top of the folded copy of Richard's executive contract. "Keep it as proof that I returned everything he gave me." Thomas covered it with the flap of the envelope. "And what will you keep?" From inside the ballroom, Vanessa's voice carried over the microphone, soft and triumphant. She was thanking the Hale family for welcoming her, though no one with the authority to do so had offered any welcome at all. Evelyn looked past Thomas to the glowing crest above the stage, gold against black, the same crest William Hale had once touched with pride in the lobby of their first headquarters. "My name," she said. For the first time that night, Thomas almost smiled, not with amusement, but with recognition. The kind one witness gives another when history stops whispering and prepares to speak aloud. A young event technician approached from the service door, nervous, holding a tablet against his chest. "Mrs. Hale," he said then, hesitated, as if suddenly aware of how dangerous that title had become in this building. Evelyn turned toward him. "The main screen can be interrupted from backstage," he said, "but only with authorization from the event sponsor." Evelyn reached into her clutch and removed the silver USB drive. The metal caught the corridor light for half a second, sharp and clean. "Then let us not keep them waiting," she said. She stepped toward the velvet curtain at the side of the ballroom, the music swelling beyond it, the applause rising in thin waves for a woman borrowing a crown. Evelyn stood behind the curtain and listened as Vanessa said, "I cannot wait to join the Hale legacy." Then Evelyn gave the technician the drive. The moment the USB drive connected, the ballroom changed before anyone understood why. The love song softened, glitched, and disappeared into a clean tone from the speakers. The golden Hale Empire crest vanished from the main screen, replaced by a dark blue board interface with the company seal in the corner and a single line across the top, "Emergency Governance Session." At first, the guests laughed nervously, thinking it was a technical mistake. Vanessa turned toward the screen with her champagne glass still raised, her smile holding for 1 second too long. Richard's expression tightened. He looked toward the sound booth, then toward the side curtain, and Evelyn stepped out from behind it. She did not rush. She did not announce herself with anger. She walked into the light as if she had always belonged there, because she had. The room noticed in layers. First the board members, who straightened in their seats. Then the reporters, who lowered their wine glasses and lifted their phones. Then Vanessa, whose smile began to lose its shape. Richard moved toward Evelyn before she reached the stairs. "Evelyn," he said, still quiet enough to pretend this was private, "step down." She kept walking. "Not tonight." 2 words, spoken evenly, carrying farther than his warning had. The host stood frozen beside the podium, one hand on his note cards, looking between Richard and the screen as if hoping someone else would tell him what his job was. Evelyn climbed the 3 steps to the stage. Her black dress made no attempt to compete with Vanessa's silver one, yet somehow the lights seemed to settle on her with more respect. Vanessa gave a small laugh into the microphone. "I think there has been some confusion," she said, turning to the audience as if she could still charm the room back into her hands. "This is supposed to be a celebration." Evelyn looked at her then, not with hatred, not with jealousy, but with the calm distance of a woman reading the wrong name on a locked door. "It is," Evelyn said, "a very necessary one." Richard reached for the microphone, but Martin Ellis rose from the front table before he could take it. So did Linda Carver. Then another director. Their movement was not loud, but it was devastating. People with real power rarely needed to make noise. Evelyn turned to the event technician near the screen and gave a slight nod. "Play the file." The first document appeared behind her, William Hale's final governance directive. The room fell into a silence so complete that the small click of Vanessa setting down her glass seemed almost rude. Richard looked up, and all the color drained from the confidence he had worn all evening. He knew that folder. He knew that signature. He had just never believed Evelyn would open it in front of everyone. The next slide loaded slowly, line by line, as cameras began recording from every corner of the ballroom. Evelyn stood still beneath the glow of the screen, hands relaxed at her sides, no ring on her finger, no tremor in her voice. Vanessa whispered, "Richard, what is this?" But Richard did not answer. For the first time all night, he was not looking at her. He was looking at his wife as if he had finally remembered she had never been standing behind him. She had been holding the foundation under his feet. The second document filled the screen, and the ballroom stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding. It was not a slide from the anniversary program. It was not a sentimental tribute to William Hale. It was the legal structure of Hale Empire, clean, current, and impossible to charm away. At the top were the corporate holdings Richard had spent years presenting as his birthright. Beneath them were the voting trusts, emergency governance provisions, and ownership transfers most of the guests had never known existed. Then the final page appeared, and every camera in the room caught the same line. Controlling voting authority, Evelyn Margaret Hale. Vanessa stared at the screen as if the words had been written in a language no one had taught her. "Richard," she whispered again, but this time her voice did not carry confidence. It carried a question he could not afford to answer. Richard took one step toward Evelyn. "This is a private board matter," he said, trying to lower the temperature of a room he had set on fire with pride. Evelyn turned to him with the calm that had once saved his company and now exposed his carelessness. "It became public when you allowed someone with no legal authority to present herself as part of Hale leadership at a corporate event. A murmur moved through the crowd, not loud, but sharp enough to cut through the crystal music of the room. Vanessa's face changed first with confusion, then with embarrassment, then with something smaller than anger. Fear of being ordinary. The next file opened on the screen: board attendance records, acquisition approvals, financing agreements, and rescue restructuring documents. One after another, Evelyn's signature appeared where Richard's speeches had once stood. Chicago refinancing, Dallas hotel division, Pennsylvania steel contract, Boston settlement, 8,000 jobs preserved. The list was not emotional. That was what made it devastating. It did not accuse Richard. It replaced him with evidence. Martin Ellis stepped away from the front table and faced the stage. "For the record," he said, his voice steady, "the board recognizes the activation of William Hale's governance clause and the transfer of controlling voting authority to Mrs. Evelyn Hale." Linda Carver followed. Seconded. Then another director. Then another. Chairs shifted across the ballroom as people began standing, not for Vanessa's performance, not for Richard's name, but for the woman whose silence had been mistaken for absence. Vanessa looked down at her silver gown, at the champagne glass. In her hand, at the diamond bracelet Richard had given her, as if those things might still prove she belonged there. They did not. "You told me this was yours," she said to Richard, quietly enough that only the first row heard. Richard said nothing. Evelyn did not smile. She did not need to. She looked at Vanessa, not as a rival, but as someone who had mistaken the front door for the deed. "There is a difference," Evelyn said, "between wearing a name and carrying the legacy behind it." The final screen loaded behind her. Chairwoman of the board, Evelyn Margaret Hale. For a moment, the entire room held its breath. Then Richard looked out at the faces of his board, his investors, his guests, and understood the truth far too late. Hale Empire had never been his to give away. The silence after the final screen was not empty. It was full of every word Richard had never said, every credit he had taken, every warning he had ignored, and every year Evelyn had carried the company while the world applauded the man standing beside her. For the first time that night, no one looked at Vanessa. Her silver dress still glittered beneath the chandeliers, but the shine no longer meant arrival. It looked borrowed, temporary, almost weightless. Richard stood beneath the Hale crest with his hands at his sides, staring at the words chairwoman of the board as if they had appeared from nowhere instead of from the history he had refused to read. Thomas Reed stepped onto the stage and placed the resolution on the podium. Evelyn took the pen. The cameras moved closer, but she did not perform for them. She signed with the same steady hand that had once saved payroll, protected contracts, and kept construction cranes moving across half a dozen states. The stroke of ink was small. The consequence was not. Effective immediately, Thomas said, his voice carrying through the speakers. Richard Andrew Hale is removed from the position of Chief Executive Officer pending full board review. Operational authority transfers to Chairwoman Evelyn Margaret Hale. No one cheered. That was what made it final. The room did not need noise to understand a fall. Richard looked at Evelyn then, and something in his face softened into disbelief, as if he had expected her to cry, plead, forgive, or at least explain herself in a way that made him feel central to her pain. She gave him none of those gifts. Vanessa stepped back from the microphone. A member of event security approached with professional calm and spoke to her quietly, asking her to leave the restricted stage area because she had no corporate authorization. The request was polite. That made it worse. Vanessa glanced at Richard, waiting for rescue, but he was still looking at Evelyn, finally seeing the woman he had spent years looking through. Evelyn closed the folder and handed it to Thomas. Then she walked down from the stage, not toward the exit, not toward revenge, but toward the long board table placed near the front of the ballroom for the anniversary ceremony. At the head of it sat William Hale's old chair, dark leather, brass studs, polished arms worn smooth by decades of decisions. Richard had used it in photographs. Evelyn had earned it in silence. She paused beside Martin Ellis, who lowered his head with quiet respect. Linda Carver stood, then another director, then the entire front row. The movement spread through the room until even the reporters stopped whispering. Evelyn sat in the chair. The chandeliers cast warm gold across her shoulders, not like a spotlight, but like morning after a long storm. She placed both hands on the table, bare left hand visible, the missing ring saying what her mouth never needed to. Richard remained on the stage beside a microphone that no longer belonged to him. Vanessa was guided toward the side doors, her borrowed future dissolving with every step. Evelyn looked once at the Hale crest, then at the employees standing near the back wall, the ones who had served dinner, managed lights, carried flowers, printed programs, and kept the night moving while powerful people made careless choices. For them, she allowed herself the smallest smile. She had not fought to keep a husband who forgot her worth. She had not tried to win back a room that underestimated her. She had simply taken her seat, and in that quiet act, every lie in the ballroom lost its voice. Evelyn Hale did not become powerful that night. She only let them discover she had been powerful all along.